Welcome to Liverpool, where the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer is preparing to deliver his speech to the party's annual conference. This is Politics Live. Yes, welcome to this special programme here covering Sir Keir Starmer's speech, live and uninterrupted. We think he's going to be taking to the stage in about 15 to 20 minutes' time. They're always fluid, these timings, of course, and probably will speak for about an hour. That's the scene inside the conference hall, and it's filling up nicely. Well, we saw the huge queue snaking around the exhibition hall, not far from where I am sitting here with my guests. And here is Sir Keir Starmer with his wife Victoria, making their sort of what looks like a victory walk, lined there by supporters being clapped in, because there is an awful lot at stake in these annual speeches to party conference. No doubt Keir Starmer's been preparing for quite some time. And we'd already heard from some of the delegates here about what they expect. We have many of them here around the set wanting to hear what our guests have to say and what they want to hear from Sir Keir Starmer. We have the Shadow Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, Times Radio presenter and former Labour advisor, Ayesha Hazarika, and the Spectator's political editor, Katie Balls. And also here for a few moments is the BBC's political editor, Chris Mason. Chris, just to take a step back, as we have a little bit of time before Keir Starmer takes to his feet, this has felt upbeat and optimistic. And of course, there is a sense that he's presenting himself as a future Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and that the Labour Party will be a future government next year. But first of all, what about the transformation to the party? What he's done so far?
It's been massive, I think, the transformation to the party. And in many ways, the best illustration of that is the thing that has dominated the news beyond the conference for the last few days and the horrendous events in the Middle East, and imagining a sort of alternative universe of that unfolding under the previous Labour leader, where we'd have seen, I think, a lot of public anguish about how the party responded to what we're seeing in Israel and in Gaza. And what we heard from Keir Starmer the other day when he was talking to Victoria Derbyshire on BBC One was that categoric line that said that what Hamas was doing amounted to terrorism, and that the political conversation beyond that didn't really go any further. And to be honest, within the conference centre itself, there hasn't been a huge amount of debate beyond that. So I think that kind of illustrates how the party internally has changed. In terms of what we're seeing here, what I've been struck by in Liverpool over the last couple of days is a kind of sea of cautious smiles. Yes, there is an optimism amongst many Labour folk, but also a keen awareness of the history books, which is, if you look back over the last century or so, Labour on the whole have been pretty hopeless at winning elections, including ones that they thought at this point in the electoral cycle that they might be able to do. So there's a nervousness. I see lots of people, when I'm talking to them, crossing their fingers, literally crossing their fingers when they sound optimistic, because of that sense of potential foreboding around a general election, even though the opinion polls and lots of the indicators would suggest that from a Labour point of view, things look pretty good.
Right, I mean, those tensions that have been at present at previous Labour conferences that perhaps aren't here now. But does that mean that perhaps what isn't quite sort of the deal that hasn't been sealed, if you like, from Keir Starmer, is how brave he can be? You talk about being cautious. Is there a sense he's being too cautious when all the indicators are going his way?
There are some folk who are saying that around the place. There's no doubt about that. And I think what we're going to get in the next hour or so will be an attempt to sort of address part of that and address the kind of, what seems to me, the central kind of political challenge for Labour right now, which is that if you look at opinion polls, there's a consistent pattern that suggests that the Conservatives are unpopular, even deeply unpopular. But there's also a suggestion, looking at those polls, that a lot of folk aren't necessarily convinced by Labour either. So how does Keir Starmer try and bridge that gap, particularly when he's working against a target he doesn't know the date of. In other words, when is the next general election going to be? That's the other question that people ask, and you get a million and one different answers.
Is it October?
Exactly. And if you're an opposition party trying to back time to the most important date of the next year-ish, but you don't know when that date is, that has all sorts of strategic challenges about at what point do you say things. Now, speaking to those who are sceptical and would like to see more from Keir Starmer sooner, they will acknowledge that his approach is an authentic one to him, to build the building blocks quite iteratively, steadily, to paint in the colours delicately, as one senior figure put it to me. It's kind of him. That's kind of his character, and that in this era of anti-politics, being authentic is key. You shouldn't try and pretend to be someone that you're not. But that central challenge for Labour about how they get that back timing right against a target that is unknowable, guessable but unknowable, is really tricky. I mean, it's the perennial challenge for an opposition party when the general election date is not set. But given that the last few elections have come out of the blue and this one won't quite come out of the blue, that is the challenge that they face.
Chris Mason, thank you very much. We'll let you go. I don't suppose you'll have to stand in the queue, will you, with everyone else? I'm sure they'll let you skip to the front, won't they? Looking at how long they are. Louise, listening to all of that, you could be in the cabinet at some point next year.
Cross our fingers.
Well, are you crossing your fingers too? Are you not? You're not yet certain, are you? You're not yet confident enough that this is yours to win?
Well, look, I think what the whole of certainly the leadership team and the whole of the Labour movement, I think, really feel is that we cannot afford to be complacent, and that is why you will see a laser-like focus at this conference and a totally united party ready to stand up to the challenges that this country faces, but also completely focused on making sure that we win the next general election. I think Chris is right to say that previous defeats have scarred us all, and even those that I'm too young to even remember, but that's why you will see a completely united party ready to stand up to the challenges. But where I do disagree, I think, is Keir's approach has been, to change the party so that we could look out to the country. But I don't think for a second that we're being cautious in the solutions that we are putting forward. What we're going to hear today from Keir is a plan to rebuild Britain and to give Britain its future back, and to set out a decade for national renewal, which includes new generations of new towns. I don't think there's anything timid or cautious about that. I think that's pretty radical.
Let's welcome Paul Novak from the TUC. Hello to you,
Hi,
Secretary of the Trades Union Congress. Listening to that, 10 years, a plan perhaps for 2 Labour governments, is there a sense in your mind and the minds of unions that this is a long-term project? There isn't going to be any immediate relief for people struggling with cost of living, with their bills, with their pay. It's going to take a long time.
Well, I think what our members want, what millions of working people up and down the country want, is a sense of hope that things can get better. We've had 13 years now, which frankly have been an unmitigated disaster for our members. Not just the immediate cost of living pressures, wages in real terms are lower than they were in 2008. So we're looking for Keir to set out the difference a Labour government will make for working people up and down the country.
Right, but that difference isn't going to include any more money, is it? Not higher offers of pay, because Labour and certainly Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, have been very clear that that is not going to change. So your sort of workers are not going to get relief even on that. They might get some hope.
Well, no, let's talk about the immediate difference Labour will make. In the first 100 days of a Labour government, Angela Rayner set out very clearly on Sunday, they'll deliver that new deal for working people, a boost to the minimum wage, a ban on 0 hours contracts, a ban on fire and rehire, day one employment rights. This is the sort of stuff that would make a difference in workplaces straight away. And I think really important sending a message out to people that work can be better, and frankly, the Britain can be better.
What about yesterday's motion on nationalisation? It's not something that the leadership is going to do. It's not committed to doing so. It was at one stage when Keir Starmer was standing for the leadership, but not anymore, despite the problems that many members and delegates here feel exist in rail, water and energy.
Well, I'm sure we'll hear from Lieu later about rail, and Labour are committed to bringing rail back into public ownership, but they're also committed to new Great British Energy, a publicly owned energy generator. And of course, we always want Labour to be bold. I'm ambitious for working people, but I think we're going to hear from Keir today the beginnings of a programme that will excite working people up and down the country, and frankly, it can't come soon enough.
Paul Novak, thank you very much for joining us. It's going to be about house building and homes, this speech. Aisha, we're going to be the builders, not the blockers. I think I've heard that once before. Is that the right priority for Keir Starmer now, ahead of the election next year?
Well, look, housing is such a huge issue. It really is like one of the biggest issues of our time, really. We didn't hear much about that from Rishi Sunak, and I think actually one area where Labour has actually put some flesh on the bone, they have actually been quite bold, is around planning and housing. Now, I don't think what we're going to see today is one big kind of rabbit out the hat in terms of like one big policy like Rishi Sunak saying we're going to ban smoking. I think it's going to be building on the missions, but house building is going to be absolutely central. I've been told that a big theme, rather than a sort of big bang, is going to be a big build in terms of building Britain back, fixing Britain, house building being at the heart of that. But what I think is really interesting is that for the first time, and I've been coming to these conferences for a long time, this is the first time in such a long time where Labour activists, MPs, journalists you speak to, for the first time genuinely believe Labour have a shot at power. Now that brings with it great pride, great excitement, but also great peril, because I think a lot of people are thinking it's still potentially over a year till we could have the next general election. The Tories might want to go long. A lot can change in that time. So there's great excitement, but I think people are also quite nervous.
How have you found the mood, Katie, here?
I mean, I think it's a very positive mood. I think last year everyone walked around going, oh, it's very positive. And people were almost surprised by the level of business. And I think this year it just feels a bit more almost like the status quo. So it's quite a calm, I think, atmosphere at this conference. I think it's noted, how many corporates are here, the level of business, something that Labour's really been working on, particularly Rachel Reeves, in terms of, meeting CEOs. And I think you do get the sense that's paid off, and particularly in her speech yesterday. So I think that's one of the more striking things. If you think back just a couple of years ago to when we were here and it was Jeremy Corbyn, such a different mood and different attendees.
Right, that is the party. It's what everyone is saying. It feels much better here inside the conference centre. But what about voters outside? There are still an awful lot of people undecided who just don't know, who perhaps voted Conservative in 2019, might have lost faith in the Conservative Party and the government, but have not yet committed to Keir Starmer. What's happened here this week that makes you think that perhaps he's connecting with them?
So I think so far we haven't seen that much of a movement, in the sense that Keir Starmer, he speaks to his team, they're saying at this conference we want to say, if not them, why us? And I think have we got that from Keir Starmer so far? I don't think his Sunday interview really developed on it, but I think this is a moment in his speech. So can he now use this to flesh that out? Of course, not everyone in the country is going to watch the entire speech. Strange. But of course, everyone is watching this programme. But will they get the clips? Will he get his lines out? How will it then see in the coming days? And I think this is his chance to try and make that impression.
I do think one thing, though, that has given the Labour Party a massive boost and a really big boost to Keir Starmer is that result in Scotland last week, because we all know that there's no route to Downing Street for Keir Starmer without winning seats in Scotland, and it has been so hard for the Labour Party to make any progress since 2015. So I think that by-election, if Labour hadn't had that win, I think the mood would be quite different.
You don't think people would have had a spring in their step?
Absolutely. And I spoke to a Scottish MSP who said, who would have ever thought that it's Labour in Scotland that would have given the wider Labour Party a spring in its step?
Well, and no wonder, I suppose, after all those years, with having just one MP in Scotland. In terms of the route back to power, there is still a core question, not just the if not them, why us, but the core question about how you can reform, repair public services without any money.
Well, absolutely, and the scale of the challenges facing the country is clearly enormous, but actually we have committed to investing in our public services. We've committed to abolishing the non-dom tax status, to invest in schools and the NHS and bring down waiting lists. We've committed to removing the VAT loophole that private schools have benefited from.
And that comes to about £5 billion. When you think of government day-to-day spending, we're talking about £1,000 billion.
Yeah, absolutely, but those are funded commitments that will have targeted policy sort of interventions in both the NHS NHS and our schools, because what we cannot do is announce unfunding spending commitments. Rachel is very clear about that. You'll have heard in a speech yesterday that any commitment to reform our public services and to deliver in Labour will be built on the rock of fiscal responsibility. But Keir will talk today about how he reformed the CPS, how he's changed the Labour Party, and how he can reform and rebuild our public services as well.
Louise Haig, I think we have to let you go and take your place inside the hall, where of course there will be a series of warm-up speeches we can see there before the traditional video leading up to Sir Keir Starmer taking to the stage to make his speech, probably in the next 5 minutes or so, and speaking, as we have said, for about an hour. What's it like in the build-up to speech day, Aisha? You know, you've been there, you've helped write these speeches, and so much is set at this one day, on this one speech.
There is so much pressure on this moment, this next hour. You know, people feel it can be sort of make or break. I'm not sure that's necessarily true, but the pressure is absolutely huge. It's high wire. And the team around the leader herself or himself, will be thinking about this speech for months. This will have been worked on for a huge amount of time. They will have spent many, many weeks refining it, honing it. There will have been kind of anxiety this week about what have you got locked down? What do you need to kind of change, freshen up? How much do you need to respond to events that are happening? I'm sure we will see some of that terrible things that have been unfolding in Israel.
Yes.
But I think this is such a big moment, and I think the nature of these speeches have changed. When you look back in history, this was all about the whole. It was giving the activists and everybody a good show. It's now about not even getting into people's living rooms through the television. It's those clips on the phone that, you know, so you have to do two things with a speech now. You've got to put on a show for everybody here, but you've also got to think in very kind of very brutal terms about, right, what's the clips for the 6 o'clock news, the 10 o'clock news? What are the clips for social media? You've got two jobs with this speech.
Well, and as you say, you can see there members of the shadow cabinet, well, they've just gone now, looking up expectantly for Sir Keir Starmer. And on that, in terms of what the Labour leadership needs to get out of this speech, it is difficult because at the moment the news is being dominated by what is happening in Israel, and he will need to somehow cut through.
Exactly, and make that impact. You'd expect the situation as well to be referenced, I think, in the speech. But it also, you know, it sets the mood of the party, how this conference speech goes. So he's got to do a few things. And while I don't think everyone is paying attention to every word, there are those lingering doubts that you do hear from members of the shadow cabinet, which is, are we being bold enough? Where's the vision? And I think he'll want to silence those figures. While you have a poll lead of about, 15 to 25 points, depending which one you pick, they're never going to be too loud, I think, the criticisms. But the point is they haven't gone away. And I think there is going to become a point where, the polls are a bit tighter, whether it's before or after an election. And that's when I think, Keir Starmer will face more critics, and he needs to, start preparing now to show that he is listening to some of the concerns.
And of course, people are going to go knocking on doorsteps. We heard from delegates saying they want something to say, something positive, because they feel it has been upbeat here at the conference. Morale in the party, you're absolutely right, Aisha, of course it's what goes on beyond the hall and voters out there, but morale in the party is quite important, isn't it? If everybody kind of knows what the vision is.
Absolutely. Look, the Labour Party is quite a sort of sometimes disparate movement. There can be quite a lot of internal conflict on various issues. But what I'm sensing at this particular moment, everybody is prepared to sort of forego their specific issue that they're not 100% happy with. Everyone's prepared to toe the line to get Keir Starmer over the line. Now, what happens then will be very, very interesting. I suspect the trade union brothers and sisters here who have been
Do they all break out then in conflict?
Well, I don't think it's if Labour wins, I think that's when the unions will come in and say, right, what are you delivering for us on pay? What are you delivering for us in terms of these industrial disputes and things like that? But I think right now there is a feeling that until the general election, people are going to kind of not go around complaining about things. They're not going to speak out against the leader. Everybody wants to get Labour over the line. The other thing that's fascinating, as Katie alluded to, is the number of businesses that are here. I mean, I did a panel event yesterday with a very prominent general secretary from a trade union and a very prominent business leader from like the gig economy. They're working together, and you think that's really interesting to be happening at this conference.
How reassuring do you think Rachel Reeves was to the business community yesterday? I mean, she was talking to them directly about the economy and that you can trust her.
So I think she was reassuring in some ways, and business figures always say that they do think that she understands what they're talking about, which they do not credit every politician with, and they're sometimes critical of Keir Starmer on that point. I think the Mark Carney endorsement was a win for Rachel Reeves, even though there are Tories who say he is Project Fear, look at his comments on Brexit, but I think because George Osborne went to such an effort to get Mark Carney to Bank of England governor, it's going to sting for some in the party. I do think the thing you do hear from business, though, which is Rachel Reeves is very good at her smoked salmon, scrambled eggs, breakfast circuit, wooing them all.
Sounds good.
Did we get that today?
Not the prawn cocktail, no.
But they would like more detail on the policies. And I think that isn't just businesses. That's what you hear a lot, which is, the mood music people like, but what exactly does this mean for your business? And we're not there yet.
The video is being played out in the hall now, so we know we're not very far away from Keir Starmer taking to his feet. I think it's just finished. They're all on their feet. It looks as if Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, there he is, strolling onto the stage to make his speech to Conference 2023.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, conference. Thank you, conference.
True democracy is citizen-led. Politics needs an update. We demand a people's house! We demand a people's house! We are in crisis! We are in crisis! Our whole future is...
Well, gosh, Keir Starmer has only just started his annual speech amidst the applause, and a protester has run right on the stage, being pretty well dragged off the stage. It was difficult to hear what he was saying. He's still shouting. He seemed to throw water, I think, over Keir Starmer. Well, that is very, very unfortunate for the leader of the party, Sir Keir Starmer, just as he's making his speech. Well, let's see how he recovers from this, apart from damping down his suit. Oh, he's going to take off his jacket. That'll be the response. Roll up his sleeves. He'll have to get stuck in. It's reminiscent of another party's conference a few years ago with Theresa May. But Sir Keir Starmer waiting to start again.
Thank you, conference. Thank you. Thank you, conference. Thank you. Thank you, conference. If he thinks that bothers me, he doesn't know me. Protest or power, that's why we changed our party, conference. That's why we changed our party. Thank you. And it was just as well it was me, because my wife's dress is really beautiful. Thank you, Marie, for those words. My mum would have loved to have been here and to have heard you saying those words. Thank you so much for doing me that honour. And thank you, conference. Thank you for that reception. It is fantastic to be here with you in Liverpool again. And now, before I get going, I know what you're thinking. Please, 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 No more Arsenal jokes. And I think you're right. But, Conference, I do want to offer my sympathies to Manchester. No, not for that reason, but because I really do feel for any city that had to host that circus last week. Honestly. What can you say about a Prime Minister who goes to Manchester to cancel Manchester's train line? The self-declared champion of motorists who had to borrow a car for a photo op. A man who keeps a very close watch on the cost of living crisis from the vantage point of a short-haul helicopter. Conference, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm beginning to see why Liz Truss won. Although I still think we'd have been better off without lettuce, actually. But it's been 13 years now. And what does Britain have to show for it? Where is their minimum wage? Where is their Shore Strike? Crime down by a third, more students than ever, devolution, the shortest NHS waiting list in history, 500,000 out of child poverty, peace in Northern Ireland. I'm not going to do the whole list. I haven't got time. But isn't the contrast stark? 13 years of things can only get better versus 13 years of things have only got worse. Conference, this is what we have to fight. The Tory project to kick the hope out of this country, drain the reservoirs of our belief. That's why I started with our achievements. I wanted to remind everyone that there was a time, and it wasn't that long ago, when questions such as, is Britain destined for decline, would have felt ridiculous even to ask. And I have to warn you, our way back from this will be hard. But know this, what is broken can be repaired. What is ruined can be rebuilt. Wounds do heal. And ultimately, that project, their project, will crash against the spirit of working people in this country, and they are the source of my hope. Because there are two stories of the past 13 years. A Westminster of chaos and crisis, 5 prime ministers in 7 years. And then the other side, a Britain where working people never let each other down. In fact, whenever they were asked, they dug deep for this country, came together for this country. And that's the cruelest cost of these 13 years of decline. That a government this week can winnow the confidence of a proud nation, undermine our foundations with the gnawing rot of despair. A sense that government cannot achieve great things, that Britain cannot achieve great things. But I believe in this country. I believe in its spirit, in its people, in its businesses, in its communities. I don't just see the sewage in our streams and seas. I see the volunteers, people who love their community, standing up to fight for clean water. I don't just see the crumbling concrete in our schools. I see the teachers in the temporary classrooms still giving our children the education they need. I don't just see the boards going up in our high streets. I see the businesses, the pubs, the cafes, still trading, still finding a way through the chaos, still serving their community. That's the real Britain Conference. Millions of people who've looked at the Tory circus and said, fine, we'll get on with it ourselves. And I say, let's stand with them. Give them the government they deserve. Turn our backs on never-ending Tory decline with a decade of national renewal. Do not doubt that the fire of change still burns in Britain. The question is whether it lives on inside Labour, and today we show it does. Today we turn the page, answer the question, why Labour? With a plan for a Britain built to last, with higher growth, safer streets, cheap British power in your home, more opportunity in your community, the NHS off its knees, a Britain with its future back. It will require an entirely new approach to politics, mission government, new priorities, totally focused on the interests of working people, 5 national missions, all fixed on a single-minded purpose, to govern for the long term, end the Tory disease of sticking plaster politics with a simple Labour philosophy that together we fix tomorrow's challenges today. And conference, this new path can only be walked by a new party, a changed Labour Party, no longer enthralled to gesture politics, no longer a party of protest, a party of service. Rebuilt, renewed, reconnected to an old partnership, a bargain, that we serve working people as they drive our country forward. And that's why we had to change so fast, why we had to fight so hard to change this party. The bond of respect that comes from service is special. National renewal depends on it. That's why we stood with NATO, a historic achievement of this party, held out our hand to business, ripped anti-Semitism out by the roots, backed Ukraine, country first, party second. Thank you, conference. Thank you. Conference, I am shocked and appalled by the events in Israel. I utterly condemn the senseless murder of men, women and children, including British citizens, in cold blood by the terrorists of Hamas. This party... This party believes in the two-state solution, a Palestinian state alongside a safe and secure Israel. But this action by Hamas does nothing for Palestinians, and Israel must always have the right to defend her people. Conference, these events, the war in Ukraine, they show precisely the test of our era. The world is becoming a more volatile place. Revolutions in energy, science, technology are reshaping the global economy. The race is on for the new jobs, the new supply chains, the new industries that will emerge. Climate change is a recipe for instability. We've seen that on our TV screens all summer. Terrorism, the movement of people, criminal gangs who exploit their vulnerability, they're all challenges we must confront. And through all this, because of all this, democratic rules, democratic values, democratic certainties are under attack. A new age of insecurity, with fault lines that run right through the living standards of working people. But look, as we've seen throughout our history, where there is change, there is also possibility. Possibility in industry, in winning the race for the jobs of the future. Possibility in technology, innovations like gene editing that will save countless lives. Possibility in 4 nations, standing together, no longer distracted or divided. And possibility in working people, in parts of our country ignored, passed over, disregarded as sources of growth and dynamism, but with the potential ready to be unlocked. It boils down to this. Can we look the challenges of this age squarely in the eye, and amidst all the change and insecurity, find the hunger to win new opportunities and the strength to conserve what is precious? Because, conference, I tell you, that is what Britain needs, and that is what we must become. People are looking at us because they want our wounds to heal, and we are the healers. People are looking to us because these challenges require a modern state, and we are the modernizers. People are looking to us because they want to build a new Britain, and we are the builders. But they also look out at the chaos in the world and in Westminster, and they want to know, can we find that elusive path to an economy that serves their community? Can we deliver the rock of stability they need to move forward with their lives, shelter from the storm, and a passage to calmer waters? Because, conference, we should never forget that politics should tread lightly on people's lives, that our job is to shoulder the burden for working people, carry the load, not add to it. This year, I went on holiday to the Lake District with my family. We were sitting in a pub near Windermere. I was eating fish and chips. Vic had the plant burger. You see, we don't focus group everything. Anyway, we were sitting there. It was calm. It was beautiful. The Lake District never lets you down. I went there every year as a child with my family. And although she struggled so much to walk, my mum loved the lakes. So it was really special to share it with my kids. And if you can believe it, it was sunny. This summer. But the reason I remember it, the privilege of it, is because on my first day back from holiday, I was in a cafe in Worthing in Sussex, talking to people, and what one woman said really stuck in my mind. She was a single mum with 2 kids. And she said to me, it's survival mode. I can't think, oh, let's do something nice. There's no long-term planning, no thinking about the future. And I could see the hurt in her eyes as she told me. That's what this cost of living crisis does. It intrudes on the little things that we love, whittles away at our joy, days out, meals out, holidays, the first things that people cut back on. Picking up a treat in the supermarket, just to put it back on the shelf. Conference, we have to be a government that takes care of the big decisions. so working people have the freedom to enjoy what they love. More time. More time, more energy, more possibility, more life. It could be football, fishing, or just a quiet time with your family. But we all need that conference. We all need the ability to look forward, to move forward, free from anxiety. That's what getting our future back really means. But look, conference, here's what we can't do. We can't take advantage, because it's exactly in moments like this, when people want change, need change, cry out for change, that the hope of the easy answer can prosper. And conference, we cannot be about that. Changing a country is not like ticking a box. It's not the click of a mouse. Long-term solutions are not oven-ready. If you think our job in 1997 was to rebuild a crumbling public realm, that in 1964 it was to modernise an economy left behind by the pace of technology, that in 1945 to build a new Britain out of the trauma of collective sacrifice, then in 2024 it will have to be all three. All three. And conference, and at a time when our politics feels broken, when our public services are broken, our public finances wrecked, the Tory mortgage bombshell that's blown up the finances of millions. Nurses, teaching assistants, builders, drivers, shop workers, carers, people who never before missed a payment in their life, working harder than ever for the wage in their pocket, and who now find themselves walking a little more slowly past the food bank in their town. The age of insecurity loaded onto the backs of working people. But there's no magic wand here. A decade of national renewal. That's what it will take. We will need ambition, determination, patience, absolutely, but also bravery. Because it's brave to reject the hope of the easy answer, courageous to choose instead the hope of the hard road. But if we give Britain the certain destination, if we walk step by step with working people, bulldoze through the barriers in their way, lay secure foundations at their feet, mission government our guide, then yes, we can get our future back. So let's set the course. Let's get Britain building again. Take back our streets, switch on great British energy, tear down the barriers to opportunity, get our NHS back on its feet. And today, another step along that road, an answer to the outrage that is 7.5 million people waiting for treatment on our NHS. People like Hamza Semakula. He's a semi-pro footballer who plays for Hendon in the Southern League. Last year, he tore his knee ligaments very badly, and that left him with a choice of paying £15,000 to go private or abandoning his career, his love, his joy. Now, Hamza actually crowdfunded his operation in the end. The British people dug deep and got him back on the pitch. And he's back in the goals as well. He scored in the FA Cup this season. But honestly, how has it come to this? working people paying for their own healthcare in a cost of living crisis. Pensioners waiting weeks, months, sometimes waiting years just for the care that they need. No, the whole point of our NHS is to be the crowd-funded solution for all of us. That's the fundamental principle. And at the next election, it's on the line. The Conservative Party that brought our NHS to its knees will put it in the ground. We have got to get it back on its feet. Thank you, Conference. Thank you, Conference. Thank you. The non-dom tax status is a legal loophole that allows some of the richest people in the world to avoid paying tax in Britain. That's money we could invest in our NHS. That's always been our priority. And right now, the biggest challenge is cutting waiting lists. So we will invest that money in boosting capacity. We will get the NHS working round the clock, and we will pay staff properly to do it. More operations, more appointments, more diagnostic tests. You will be seen more clearly in an NHS clearing the backlog 7 days a week. But Conference, do not doubt the hard road either. Because if all we do is place the NHS on a pedestal, then I'm afraid it will remain on life support. I know some people don't like the word reform, but I tell you now, there's no other option. We must be the government that finally transforms our NHS. We can't go on like this. We can't go on with a sickness service. We need an NHS that prevents illness, keeps people healthy and out of hospital in the first place. We must use technology to overhaul every aspect of delivery, move care closer to communities, deploy the power of artificial intelligence to spot disease quickly. Mental health treatment when you need it, we'll guarantee that. The 8 a.m. scramble for the GP appointment, we'll end it. Dangerous waits for cancer diagnosis, we will consign them to history. But Conference, here's the bigger lesson. Because what is true of our NHS is true right across the board. We're not here to manage the shop. We're here to make government more dynamic, more joined up, more strategic, focused at all times and without exception on long-term national renewal. Mission government. It's not about size, it's about capacity. A more powerful engine, not a bigger car. A reforming state, not a checkbook state. Now, people will say, don't rock the boat. We've always done it like this. Is this really necessary? I've reformed a public service before. I know how it goes. But it's our responsibility to do it. And across our public services, the prize is huge. Because if we call time on wasteful police procurement, then we can have a community policing guarantee, more police in your town, fighting antisocial behaviour and taking our streets back. If we ignore the appeals for the status quo on private school tax breaks or outdated national curriculum, then we can have mental health staff in every school, more expert teachers in the classroom, more creativity, speaking skills, confidence, shatter the class ceiling at source. And if we want to challenge the hoarding of potential in our economy, then we must win the war against the hoarders in Westminster. Give power back and put communities in control. That's mission government. But Conference, it also has to be something more, a deeper bond, a partnership between people and politics that in our age, after these 13 years of decline, will be hard to renew. Some people say to me, it's about honesty, isn't it? We were lied to. these politicians were liars. But, you know, that's not it. Well, maybe for one of them, it actually was it. But for people like Rishi Sunak, it's more that they cannot see the country before them. The walls of Westminster are so high. The view that your lives, your services, your future are just pieces on their board. That's so deeply ingrained in their mindset. They have no way to understand what you've been through. You know, they actually believe what comes out of their mouths. When your public services were cut to the bone and they said, we're all in it together. When they told you to your face that Brexit would only bring benefits for your business. When they say now that they're taking tough decisions for you in this cost of living crisis. They've convinced themselves that this is what they're really doing. They can't see Britain, not your Britain, can't accept that every time your interests were on the line, they made you pay. But when it's people like them, they look after themselves. Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak and the shallow men and women of Westminster, unable to see, unable to listen, unable to stand in your shoes and serve this country. And they won't change. They can't change. Couldn't even change during a pandemic, when our country came together to follow rules that they set and they broke. Conference, my sister is a care worker. She was a care worker during the pandemic. 14-hour shifts, often overnight, unimaginable pressure. And the reward, a struggle every week, and I mean every week, just to make ends meet. But it's not just about that. It's also about respect. Working people never let each other down. And in the pandemic, the British people didn't let them down. The bond of respect was there. That's why we clapped. Britain knew exactly who was serving it in its time of need. And for me, that's the biggest frustration. Not the pitiful reward the government gave for that service, but also the countless missed opportunities to deepen that bond. Use it to change our country. Because I believe this country respects itself. I believe the British people respect each other. And I believe that if people see that respect, see that service in their politics, then they will commit to the mission of national renewal. Let me put it this way. At some point in your life, many people here will have heard a nagging voice inside saying, no, this isn't for you. You don't belong here. You can't do that. Working class people certainly hear that voice. Trust me. In some ways, it's the hardest class ceiling of all. But conference, imagine if instead a whole country said, you do belong. Imagine if a whole country said, we back your potential. Imagine if a whole country commits properly to unlocking the pride you have in your community. Then look what we could build. A country where every contribution is equally respected. Where you don't have to change who you are just to get on. Where whatever your background, you feel secure, valued, certain that things will be better for your children. Thank you, Constance. Thank you. A Britain strong enough, stable enough, secure enough for you to invest your hope, your possibility, your future. A Britain built to last, where working people are respected, crime is prosecuted, ambulances come, the minimum wage is enforced, infrastructure gets built, children feel safe in their classrooms, businesses and workers unite in partnership, Fight for the jobs of the future, jobs that are well paid and in your town and where MPs have only one job: service. No more. No more bonuses for people pumping sewage into our rivers. No more pensioners. No more pensioners freezing while energy firms make record profits. No more government contracts awarded by the back door. No more cleaners mocked as they scrub mess off the walls of illegal parties in Westminster. Thank you, Tim. A future where we believe workers' rights are good for growth. Inequality corrosive. Communities should have a bigger stake. Climate change is an opportunity we can't pass up. Young people's aspirations must be met. Britain is respected around the world again. That's our future conference. Let's get it back. Because government can be a force for good. We can fight alongside working people in the name of justice and opportunity. That's why I came into politics. I've looked into the eyes of the people that we must serve at the Crown Prosecution Service in my work in Northern Ireland, and I've seen reflected back the knowledge that government can make or break a life. It's that responsibility that drives me on towards the reforms I know we must make, the Britain I know we must build. So let's get to work, because there is one barrier so big, so imposing, that it blocks out all light from the other side. A blockage that stops this country building roads, grid connections, laboratories, train lines, warehouses, wind farms, power stations. An obstacle to the aspirations of millions, now and in the future, who deserve the security of home ownership. A future hidden by our restrictive planning system. And conference, we must bulldoze through it. We used to call it the dream of home ownership, didn't we? We used to say it glibly on stages like this. But look at Britain now. It has become a dream. It's out of reach for millions. And if we don't take action, it will only become more distant. A luxury for the few, not the privilege of the many. And look, I'm trying really hard not to mention the house I grew up in again. But seriously, that Pebble Dash semi was everything to my family. It gave us stability through the cost of living crisis in the 70s. It served as the springboard for the journey I've been on in my life. And I believe every family deserves the same. To have made that aspiration harder for working people, that's been a disaster for our economy and for the unity of this country. So today we launch a new plan to get Britain building again, a signal of our determination to fight the blockers who hold a veto over British aspiration. No more land bankers sitting comfortably on brownfield sites while rents in their communities rise. No more councils refusing to develop a local plan because they prefer the backdoor deal. No more inertia in the face of resistance, and there will be resistance from people who say, no, we don't want Britain's future here. My message to them is this: a future must be built. That is the responsibility of serious government. And if we continually wash our hands of this task, we all end up in a rut, just like now. So it's time to get Britain building again. It's time to build 1.5 million new homes across the country. Opportunities for first-time buyers in every community. New development corporations with the power to remove the blockages. New infrastructure to support families and communities to grow. Roads, tunnels, power stations built quicker and cheaper. And a new effort to rewire Britain. The national grid moving faster, a lot faster, laying the cables our future prosperity needs. It's a future with more beautiful cities, more prosperous towns, new parks, green spaces, new public services, all aligned with our plan. And conference, sometimes the old Labour ideas are right for new times. So where there are good jobs, where there is good infrastructure, where there's good land for affordable homes, we'll get shovels in the ground, cranes in the sky, and build the next generation of Labour new towns. Thank you. Thank you, Conference. And no, this doesn't mean we're tearing up the green belt. Labour is the party that protects our green spaces. No party fights harder for our environment. We created the national parks, created the green belt in the first place. I grew up in Surrey. But where there are clearly ridiculous uses of it, disused car parks, dreary wastelands, not a green belt, a grey belt, sometimes within a city's boundary, then this cannot be justified as a reason to hold our future back. We will take this fight on. That's a Britain built to last. And here's why. Because getting Britain building again is critical for economic growth, our most important mission, and also a means, a way to soften that hard road, deliver on national renewal, and escape the cost of living crisis permanently. And that is why this Labour Party will fight the next election on economic growth. An economy that works for the whole country is what the British people want. The Tories know that. They stood at this crossroads before. They called it levelling up. But as soon as they counted their votes, they turned back. Back to the comfort of the easy answer. Back to the trickle-down nonsense that sees wealth trickle up and jobs trickle out. You cannot understate this. Those ideas are finished. Blown away by a world where tyrants like Putin pay little regard to the niceties of market dogma, but also because in the end, they always make working people pay. You saw it last year. Tax cuts for the richest, the pound sinking like a stone, a wrecking ball to our finances, economic shrapnel everywhere, family budget shredded, a £300 billion bill, the only remedy, Labour stability. You know, I never thought I would hear a modern Conservative Prime Minister say that 50% of our children going to university was a false dream. My dad felt the disrespect of vocational skills all his life, but the solution is not and never will be the levelling down of working-class aspiration to go to university. But conference. But conference, this is the Tory mindset now. Don't solve problems, exploit them. So if you are a Conservative voter who despairs of this, if you look in horror at the descent of your party into the murky waters of populism and conspiracy, with no argument for economic change. If you feel our country needs a party that conserves, that fights for our union, our environment, the rule of law, family life, the careful bond between this generation and the next, then let me tell you, Britain already has one, and you can join it. It's this Labour Party. Thank you, Conference. And this is our mission. Every new era of growth must start with an expansion of the country's productive capabilities. That is an iron law. But what isn't an iron law is who that growth benefits. Back in the 80s, the Tories gave us the financial Big Bang, and we're still counting the cost. Wealth and opportunity concentrated in the hands of the few. Our Labour era will instead unleash the big build, and the winners this time will be working people everywhere. That's a Britain built to last. And Conference, it is a new way. Unlike the Tories, we won't be dragged back to the easy answers. The barriers of dogma will not block our path. That's why we hold out the hand of partnership to business, champion the need for a competitive tax regime, understand that private enterprise is the only way this country pays its way in the world. And at the same time, we scrap 0 hours contracts. We end fire and we hire. Make work pay with a real living wage and say unambiguously, this is good for growth. Conference, we say yes to sound money, yes to cutting waste and debt, embrace the need for stability. Fiscal responsibility is non-negotiable. And if investment can kickstart growth, if investment can save money in the long run, can protect jobs, create jobs, crowd in billions of private investment, then yes, we must get on and do it. And look, business is ready to join us in this endeavour. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with leading CEOs who tell me it's the chopping and changing, the sticking plaster politics, the chaos that is holding back investment in our country. That's why we'll set up the National Wealth Fund, work hand in glove with the private sector to rebuild this country. But as we share the risk, we must also share the rewards. So we will make sure that the British people retain a stake in our investments. This is our mantra. The fight for the future must go hand in hand with the fight for every pound. That's a Britain built to last. Not state control, not pure free markets, but a genuine partnership, sleeves rolled up, working for the national interest, worker and business, public and private, building a bridge from the jobs we must protect today to the opportunities we have to win for tomorrow. That's why the global crisis of the last 13 years have been so painful for Britain. The stand-aside state that leaves nobody with the future they want because there's no direction. An irresponsibility towards the future that defies the values Conservatives say they support. You heard the Prime Minister banging the drum again last week. But I say to him, look around Britain. Look at the bills working people are paying now. They're more expensive because you didn't build the gas storage. You didn't invest in clean British energy. You scrapped home insulation. And you're doing it all again. moving the targets back, passing it on to the next generation, letting the cost rise because you won't pay. Sticking plaster politics, an approach as riven through the foundations of our security as the crumbling concrete in our schools. The never-ending cycle of Tory Britain, party first, country second, drift, stagnate, decline. We have to turn the page on this conference. Government must steer the ship on industrial policy. That's a crucial part of any plan for growth. So here's our strategy. Step one, our National Wealth Fund, standing with business, ready to invest in the critical infrastructure that we need. The battery gigafactories, the clean British steel, the ports that can finally handle large industrial parts. More growth, more demand, more jobs. Step two, long-term stability for researchers, investors, innovators. A real boost for life sciences and the automotive industry. And a British jobs bonus that will attract new investment to our industrial heartlands, from Bridgend to Burnley, the backbone of Britain, once again powering us towards national renewal. Step three, a new direction on skills, because a future must be trained as well as built. And the generation that sacrificed so much during the pandemic, their potential must be backed. So today we commit to a new generation of colleges, technical excellent colleges, colleges with a stronger lead to their local economies, planted firmly in the ground of young people's aspirations, but also in the pride, the pull of the badge on your shirt, the ambition you feel when building a legacy for your community. Training lab workers in Derbyshire, automotive engineers in Wolverhampton, computer scientists in Manchester, nuclear technicians in Somerset, builders in Staffordshire, tool makers in Hull. My dad would have loved that. And conference step four, a new mindset. Because when an opportunity is there to be won, you have to take it. Clean British energy is cheaper than foreign fossil fuels. That means cheaper bills for every family in the country. But conference, also a chance to make us more competitive. Countries like America are using this gift to create manufacturing jobs, the like of which we haven't seen for decades. And they're not the only ones. So when Rishi Sunak says, row back on our climate mission, I say, speed ahead. Speed ahead with investment. Speed ahead with 500,000 jobs. Speed ahead with great British energy. A new energy company that will harness clean British power for good British jobs. A company that will be publicly owned, conference, and will be based in Scotland. Because, conference, though great British energy will be a shared mission, Scotland has the skills, Scotland has the ingenuity, and Scotland is at the heart of a Britain built to last. That's what the people of Rutherglen voted for. And conference, I want to thank Anas for his inspiring leadership in that campaign and beyond, and Michael Shanks, who will serve his community with dignity, pride and determination. Michael. Conference, Scotland can lead the way to a Labour government, but be under no illusion. We must earn every vote. We must understand that the Scottish people are not just looking at us, they're also looking at Britain. The challenge of change remains. But nonetheless, for the first time in a long time, we can see a tide that is turning. 4 nations that are renewing. Old wounds of division, exploited by the Tories and the SNP, beginning to heal. So let the message from Rutherglen ring out across Britain. Labour serves working people in Scotland because Labour serves working people across all these islands. There's nothing more important, no distractions, no higher cause. That's who we stand for, what we stand for, our argument for Britain. An old partnership perhaps, but a flame now reignited to face a modern age of insecurity. A Britain once again united by the solidarity of working people, staring down the challenges of a more volatile world, fighting for our future together. And conference, it will be a fight. The SNP will regroup. Of course they will. Once again, they will wave away the lessons of history, try to present nationalism as a bridge to the world. We have to remind them it can barely provide a ferry out of the Hebrides. As for the Tories, I have to warn you, a party that has so completely severed its relationship with the future, that is prepared to scorch the earth just to get at us, they will be dangerous. Trust me, wherever you think the line is, they've already got plans to cross it. But they'll be up for the fight. They're always up for the fight to save their own skins. And this isn't over. In fact, it's barely begun. So we have to be disciplined, focused, ready to fight back, and confident, conference, because we have come so far already. We've dragged this party back to service, and we can do the same for politics. I grew up working class. I've been fighting all my life, and I won't stop now. I've felt the anxiety of a cost of living crisis before, and until your family can see the way out, I will fight for you. That's my mission, and we will do it. We will face down the age of insecurity together. Break the stranglehold of Tory decline. Walk towards a decade of national renewal. Conference. Why Labour? Because we serve your interests. Why Labour? Because we will grow every corner of our country. Why Labour? Because we have a plan to take back our streets, switch on great British energy, get the NHS back on its feet, tear down the barriers to opportunity and get Britain building again. A plan for a Britain built to last, a plan to heal the wounds, a plan to turn the page and say, in a cry of defiance to all those who now write our country off, Britain must, Britain can, Britain will get its future back. Thank you, conference. Thank you, conference. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, the conference hall is on its feet. They're cheering out here, just behind us, where our studio is for Politics Live. It was a rousing, energetic and powerful speech by Keir Starmer, and he will want to soak up the atmosphere and the adulation you can see there on the face of the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, in the audience with her Shadow Cabinet members. It didn't, of course, start off as planned, because no sooner had Keir Starmer, who's now rubbing the glitter off his hands that was thrown on him, being greeted by his wife Victoria there, but no sooner has he started his speech than a protester had run onto the stage shouting, and I thought it was water. In fact, it turned out to be glitter. He was dragged off the stage pretty quickly, but it was very disruptive at the beginning. There will be questions for security, but undeterred, taking off his jacket, rolling up his sleeves, perhaps a metaphor for all of the things that he said throughout this speech that lasted about an hour. in which he started off by saying, first of all, this party has changed. He said, that's why we stood with NATO. An historic achievement of this party, held out our hand to business, ripped anti-Semitism out by the roots, backed Ukraine, underlining that the party of his predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn, is long gone. He then addressed the appalling events in Israel. He said, I utterly condemn the senseless murder of men, women and children, including British citizens, in cold blood by the terrorists of Hamas, saying that Israel must always have the right to defend her people. And that was greeted with the first standing ovation by conference. He said that not only had the party changed, he said that changing a country, which of course is what this speech is all about, setting out his prospectus for government and for being a Prime Minister, a Labour Prime Minister. He said changing a country is not like ticking a box. He said, if you think our job in 1997 was to rebuild a crumbling public realm, and in 1964 it was to modernise an economy left behind by the pace of technology, in 1945 to build a new Britain out of the trauma of collective sacrifice, then in 2023 we have to do all three. And that is no mean task. And he didn't sugarcoat any of the areas and issues that this conference loves so much, particularly on the NHS. We're going to be joined by his deputy leader and shadow deputy prime minister, if they win next year, Angela Rayner. But first of all, let's talk to Vicky Young, the BBC's deputy political editor. What did you make it?
I think you've got to think about the context of this, and throughout the whole week here, this is a sustained and large poll lead that Labour have had. Keir Starmer, when he came in, there were various phases as people talked about that he was going to do. One was detoxifying the party. They feel they've done that now. They probably didn't think that the Tories would implode quite so quickly, but they also are very aware that people's disillusion with the Tories is not necessarily going to be enough to get him into Downing Street. So this was much more about not just his analysis of what has gone wrong, but what he thinks needs to be done about it. Now, I'd say it's still pretty short on policies. Yes, there's new towns, there's stuff about net zero, all of those things, but nothing.
There were no new
policies as such. So I think there's still a lot to do there. They know that. They don't want to do that too early. But this was much more about him standing there, and will people look at him and think he could be our next Prime Minister? And actually what happened to him at the beginning there, his composure, he kept calm. I think that would have actually helped in a way, despite the shock of that happening to him. But as you can see in the audience, they're absolutely delighted with it.
Well, yes, and let's hear what delegates and members in the hall thought, because my colleague Leila Nathu is there talking to some people.
Jo, I am outside one of the exits off the hall. I have to say, at the moment, it looks like people are still in there trying to get the last look off Sir Keir Starmer. We're going to try and grab some people as they come out. Excuse me, we're live on the BBC. Just wanted to ask you what you made of what you heard. Not interested in talking to us today, that's okay. How about you, sir? Did you get what you wanted to hear? No? Okay, here we go. You can obviously see there was a rapturous applause in the conference hall as Keir Starmer spoke. Plenty of standing ovations at every turn, really. A lot of support for the change message, the message he's changed his party. Let's try and grab another few people as they come out as well. Excuse me, we're live on the BBC. Just wanted to know what you made of the speech by Keir Starmer.
I won't comment, thanks.
No comment. Not many people are interested right now speaking to us here, Jo. Hi there, we're from BBC News. Just wondering what you felt you made of the speech, sir.
Excellent, right time. And it's also recognising that when Attlee, who was very shy, he had left-wing nutcases, right-wing nutcases, but he got the NHS, he did things as a team. And Sir Keir has made a team, and a fantastic team it is.
So you got what you wanted from this speech. Does he do anything more, do you think?
I think the people get what they want. That's what we're looking for, not what I want. What Sir Keir wants is what the people want. And they're saying, vote Labour.
You're feeling hopeful for the party's prospects?
Well, you live in hope.
OK, here we go. Right, so you've just heard Sir Keir Starmer inside. What did you make of what you heard?
There were some things that were left out of the debate that I wasn't happy about, but the fact that he covered it in his speech, I think it kind of made up for that a bit, like what he said about the housing, what he said about sorting out some new towns, and also kind of what he was talking about with the Green New Deal and the energy and all that sort of stuff. I think it sounds good that we're not just going to kind of be giving the money away. The fact that he says that we're going to get it back, so we'll see what actually happens. But from what he said, it sounds good to me.
So housing was a big one for you. I mean, he did devote quite a lot of time to building, didn't he? Was that convincing, do you think?
I mean, I feel like he had to because we didn't get to debate it. So I suppose that was to ensure that he could say what he needed to, regardless of what was said on the floor, so he gets to say what he wants. So it was well planned out, and I could see kind of why it was done that way around.
Do you think Prime Minister in waiting?
Yeah, easy, unless there's another national amnesia where people do the usual and come back out and be like, yeah, but Tories. But I mean, if we don't win now, it's going to be, oh my God. Yeah, we have to win, isn't it? We'll be good.
A lot of support in that conference hall, I think, for Keir Starmer's message. What stood out for you particularly in terms of what resonated with you?
I think, like, really and truly, talk about the skills, sort of ensuring that they're not allowing the Tories to tell us that university shouldn't be an option for everybody, because although it isn't something that everybody wants, it definitely should be an option, especially if it's something that makes sense.
Okay, thanks so much. Well, we will have to see a lot of people now streaming out of this hall. Clearly very, very supportive crowd there in the conference hall, but clearly Keir Starmer's mission is to reach beyond this arena and out into the country.
Leila Nathu, they're getting a flavour, testing the temperature and the reaction from delegates who have listened to Sir Keir Starmer's speech. What did you think of it, Aisha?
Well, of course, that rather unfortunate moment at the beginning, but I think actually the fact that he dealt with that quite calmly as well, and the whole room is behind him. Look, this was a big frame. This is his big pitch, and the big frame was, look, chaos and decline with the Conservative Party, or order and renewal. And also, I felt like this line about political service was really, really important. And I think that's something you're going to see, which is sort of an authentic thing for him to say. Remember, he was a public servant before he became a political leader. He led the Crown Prosecution Service. He's expecting his kind of new team of shadow cabinet people, MPs, to really feel that sense of sort of service. As I said beforehand, no big kind of rabbit out of the hat. You know, sort of trying to explain more about what the missions are. But I think the fact that house building was probably the most exciting thing that came out of it. This idea of new towns, this idea of kind of 1.5 million new homes, that's very much part of the kind of rebuilding, build back better sort of thing that he's trying to kind of push. But I think his team will sort of feel that this was a very Keir Starmer speech. It wasn't kind of pizzazz and rabbits out the hat. It was kind of sober, it was serious, it was a kind of a narrative about what his values are. This idea, I think the other line that really stuck out for me was saying that this country has got wounds to heal and that we will be the healers. There's very much a sort of fixing Britain, healing Britain, but not over-promising.
No, certainly wasn't over-promising in terms of policy announcement. He may feel, still as leader of the opposition, that he doesn't yet have to do that, paint in primary colours, if you like. But he said the path can only be walked by a new party in terms of changing the country. One of service countering Rishi Sunak's attempt last week to paint himself as the change candidate despite 13 years of Conservative government.
Yes, and Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer both want to say they're the change candidate. I think Keir Starmer has an easier job in his mission just simply because we've had 13 years of the Tories, so it's much harder. But it's why Rishi Sunak did those big bang announcements last week, you know, policies that they tried to keep secret, didn't quite work, but then they thought would lead the news. Keir Starmer did not do that today, and I think it's, you know, the housing was probably one more of the radical things, but I think it shows that he's trying to have that balance where it looks like change, but it's not scary change. But there were still some dividing lines. And I thought one area that was interesting, and I agree with what Aisha was saying, was on net zero. It really felt as though that is somewhere where there's been lots about, you know, green borrowing, the Green New Deal, but talking about how net zero, you know, was a very good thing. Ed Miliband very enthusiastically clapping, I think more than most. It showed that they do think there's probably votes in an area where, by differentiating themselves from the Tories and sounding more proactive, they think that's going to work for them.
I mean, I'm just going to introduce Gary Smith from GMB. Thank you very much for joining us after the speech. First of all, just your reaction.
I thought it was a fantastic speech. There's so much in this country that is broken. Our infrastructure is broken. Our social fabric has been torn apart. He gets that. He gets the dignity that comes with work. He talked about working class communities. I thought he showed real leadership and fire today, and it's in stark contrast to what we've got at the moment. This is a Prime Minister in waiting for me.
What about, though, the fact that he talked about the NHS? It got, as always, a big cheer. We've got to put it back on its feet. But he said it has to come with reform. He said, acknowledging that some in the hall here don't want to accept it, that the admission that vast sums of new money will not be available. There will not be a chequebook. Do you accept that?
There is going to have to be change. People know it. He was talking about proactively managing healthcare to stop people getting sick in the first place. And very importantly, in every speech he gives, he references social care. You'll think about care workers in this country, predominantly women, providing critical care on pennies above the minimum wage. Keir Starmer gets ordinary working people, he gets the dignity of work, and he spoke about the need for people to be fairly paid for the work, and for the jobs, and a new deal for working people.
Well, what do you say about no new money for the NHS? There are record amounts of cash and money have gone into the NHS, and yet he says it's on its knees.
If Keir Starmer turned up today and promised billions in new spending, he'd be criticised for it. Our economy is tanked. It is in a mess. Everybody in this country knows it. They see it. They can feel it. He articulated that pain today. So I think it was balanced. It was sensible. And I think it will strike a chord with ordinary people in this country.
Right, I mean, it's interesting listening to Gary Smith. In fact, Aisha said earlier on it might be different when the election is over. If Labour win the election, then it may be that union leaders like Gary might be saying to Keir Starmer, well, you've won now, it's going to be a little bit different.
But we talk a lot, don't we, about is this like 1997, you know, but when Tony Blair came in. I mean, the difference is the state of the economy. And I do think that what Keir Starmer's doing, and I do think the bit about the NHS was really telling, saying, you know, talking about not having checkbooks, it's about reform, and also acknowledging there are people in his own party who don't want that. Talking about wealth creation. All this week they've been talking about businesses, they've been talking about growth, and that is something that is, you know, that is similar to Blair, but there's also a difference because the economy is not in the same place as it was in 1997, and you know that's going to be a huge test. And at the moment, he can probably keep people on side because if you've been out of power for that long, you know, of course people are very keen to be back in power. But you know, it is going to be an issue about him not maybe having that money to pump into public services. It's certainly not at the beginning.
There's lots of money available. There's private capital. We need to work together, the best of unions, the best of government, the best of industry, to rebuild this country. We rebuild our infrastructure. We start putting our social fabric together, giving working class people hope and opportunity, bringing apprenticeships back. I thought it was a fantastic speech. I think there's a real vision there, and I think it's going to connect. I really do.
I mean, Gary Smith's excited. He's excited by what he's heard, excited by the prospect of a Labour government under Keir Starmer. Will the reality hit a little harder?
Look, there's no doubt that Labour is going to inherit a very, very difficult situation.
And he admitted that.
And
he was
also,
honest about
look,
that.
if the Conservatives go long with the next election, I think they're going to have a salted earth approach, and I think goodness knows what more decline may happen. So Labour might inherit something which is even worse than we have now. But I think what Labour is doing correctly, look, Gary is a really strong leader in the trade union movement. There are many leaders here this week. They want a Labour government. They probably not get everything they want from the Labour Party at the moment. No. But who else is also here? Business leaders. And I think because things are so bad at the moment, you've got union leaders and business leaders prepared to come together and work together through a future government to say, look, what can we do? And that is quite unusual. You know, that doesn't happen all the time. But I do think what Starmer and his team have tapped in is this huge anxiety about the state of the country, a collective feeling that people want to come and fix Britain, an acknowledgement that the economy is in a really bad way, and a feeling, look, everyone's not going to get everything they want, but there is a feeling that people can try and come together. But it is not going to be easy. Everybody is not going to get everything they want with a Labour government.
No, or certainly not at the beginning or even for the first few years. I just want to remind you of what Matt Rack, the president of the TUC, said quite recently, a few weeks ago. There is no point just changing the rosette on government if we still have austerity. That's a valid concern.
Look, this is not a Labour government that's talking about austerity. This is a government this is a government in waiting. It's a party that's got a radical programme over workers' rights. It's got a proud programme for bringing jobs home here to the UK and rebuilding our communities.
Just one point really quickly though. Starmer is going to have to deliver quickly. We talked about that Rutherglen by-election, but there are elections in Scotland in 2026. So Anna Sarwar is going to be under a lot of pressure very, very soon after, if there is a Labour government. So Keir Starmer is going to have to show he can deliver for the people of Scotland ahead of those Holyrood elections in 2026. So right now they need to be thinking about their 100-day programme and delivering pretty quickly.
And that's why the core mission is the economy and growth. But every politician says they want growth. We've heard it from all of the predecessors to Rishi Sunak, including himself. And now Keir Starmer wants it. Rachel Reeves has said it's the core mission. But it's not going to happen quickly, is it?
No, and I think particularly too when you look at planning reform, which is really central to how Labour plan to achieve economic growth, that is something that is going to take quite a long time, even with the really ambitious targets they mentioned there on housing. And that's why you keep hearing about this decade of renewal, which is obviously the idea of we need at least 2 terms, guys. And I think if you do get a Labour government, I think one of the things on the first day and so forth will be to say, oh, look, you know, guess you thought it was bad. It's even worse than you realise. The Tories lied to you. A bit like that, you know, no money note. And I think they'll try and blame things on the Tories and the inheritance to buy themselves some time. But of course, it's very easy to have unity when you're 20 points ahead. I think when you get in power, it's going to get much trickier.
I think it's another issue, though, isn't there, about voters believing promises.
Well, that's,
and I think that's the
trust.
thing. Trusty. And I think that the worry, and I think Wes Streeting talked a little bit about this week, is that, you know, people talk about the Conservatives, what's happened with the Conservatives, but has the sort of distrust that a lot of the electorate have against the Conservatives, has that infected the whole political system? So if he were to stand up there and promise all these things and promise them really quickly, no one's going to believe him anyway. But on the other hand, people want hope. It's not enough just to keep criticising what's happened.
No.
They need hope. They want to know that everything isn't broken forever, that something can be done to change it. Now, I think he's got a lot more to say about that. We'll have to say a lot more before the election, before he can convince people, because, you know, just people being apathetic and not coming out and voting for Labour is also a problem they might face.
And he did answer the question to some extent, why us? And there was a sense of hope and optimism that he is trying to project. The trust issue is important, isn't it? Because if Katie is right, if you keep blaming the Conservatives, oh, well, we've opened the books. We now, as you say, it looks even worse than we thought. So we won't be able to fulfil the house building programme that we promised. We won't be able to rebuild our public services. That's going to be very, very difficult.
Absolutely. Look, nobody's expecting the kind of euphoria of 1997 because it just isn't going to be the splash to the cash to splash. But if Labour come in and it's just a council of despair and it's like, hey, we can't do this, we can't do that, that's going to be very disappointing. And I think what they're having to do now, which is why we haven't had more policy announcements, they want to be bold, but they don't want to be stupid. They don't want to risk anything. That's what Peter Mandelson has been saying to me this weekend. I think we will get more flesh on the bones, but they are very aware that people's trust is so low in terms of what we can be delivered, from Brexit to, you know, how many changes of Prime Minister. And they're striking that balance between not kind of overspinning and overselling, but offering some kind of hope and something different.
Well, I'm very glad to say we've been joined by Angela Rayner, Deputy Leader of the Labour Party and the Shadow Deputy Prime Minister, and the Shadow of Levelling Up. I'm surprised you can remember the whole title of Levelling Up Housing Communities. I mean, obviously, housing was pretty well the centrepiece of what you and what Keir Starmer is presenting. Now, you've worked with Keir Starmer for a long time, serving as his deputy for 3 years. Do you think we've just seen the real Keir Starmer today?
I think so. I loved how he knitted where his values come from, because often I've always said I overshare, Keir undershares. Today, for me, he talked about the substance. Rishi Sunak didn't mention housing once in his speech, and we know that that's a real problem and a challenge, not just for people to get on in life, but also about that growth that we want for Britain as well, that infrastructure, and really starting to get that moving. So I thought it was fantastic how he wedded his own personal story, and you could see that emotion in him about how he wants to change Britain for the better. And that optimism, it's like, you know, we're not talking Britain down. It's like, no, we all want to work. And when you bring the working class together, the drivers of our economy, that's how you get real growth.
Because there has been some doubt in terms of who Keir Starmer is, what does he stand for? He was trying to flesh out his prospectus for government if Labour actually wins. We talked about a year ago about Keir Starmer when you said, yes, sometimes I tell him he needs to put a bit more welly into it. Has that
I saw that today. You saw that sort of passion and where he comes from. And I like the way it was woven into, you know, at the beginning when he was introduced about how his mum and dad and how he grew up and the aspiration that they had for him and how he really pushed forward and the opportunities that he got. And then also about how, you know, Britain feels at the moment everything's in decline, but it doesn't have to be that way. So it's not about talking Britain down. It's about actually saying we've got opportunities here. And Rishi Sunak, you know, he went back on his commitments, whereas Keir was like, no, speed ahead with them.
Do you think he did put a bit more welly into it?
I think he did. And look, I think there, as we've said, there wasn't the big kind of rabbit out of the hat moment, but that's a strategic decision, and he's been very, very clear about why he wants to do that. But I think he made the contrast between what the Tory offer is and what the psychology of the Tory party is compared to what he is offering. And I think that is something which a lot of people will find easy to understand. There's been a lot of chaos under the Conservative Party over the last 13 years. What he's offering is some stability, some decency as well. And I think a lot of people will feel that is really, really important, particularly after the pandemic, Partygate, you know, the kind of lies, all that sort of stuff. So I think that kind of distinction he will have spelt out. Also, even the way he dealt with that protest, you know, he didn't do anything aggressive. You know, I even think the way he dealt with it kind of showed that he's actually kind of...
He didn't do a John Prescott then?
No, he didn't. Thank goodness he didn't do a John Prescott.
Rachel Reeves' face, I mean, she was really angry. But I love the way Keir actually said, we're not protests. That's not going to change things for the better for people. Actually, it's about real delivery, and he will
you've mentioned delivery because that is what it's going to be about. The ambition was clear, the rhetoric was strident, but it will be about delivery, and particularly when it comes to house building. He talked about the Pebble semi that he grew up in and said he wants that for every family. You're proposing to build new towns, lots of them. Yeah. Where will they be? How many are we talking about?
Well, he also talked about the planning infrastructure and about local plans and working. Sure. We've even met with our mayors and talked about how we actually deliver that. He talked about the green belt and the grey belt. That gives you a clear indication of actually working with the combined authorities and with mayors.
But how many are we talking about? People will want to know. A whole new town could be springing up near to where I live.
Yeah, and
all over the country, dozens of them?
Well, we're saying that there is plots where we know and where local authorities and mayors are saying, look, we can build this here and we want to enable that to happen. We've got a really ambitious target of house building. We know what the challenge is to get there, and we're going to get there because we know we need those homes for the future, and we will set that out at the general election. And what we're saying to local authorities now, of all political stripes, you want to be part of that, you want to tackle the housing crisis in this country, we're going to enable you to do that.
Well, they do want you to tackle the housing crisis, but they might not necessarily want a whole new town near to where they live. And there is opposition to some extent to the idea of new towns. What happens when you meet resistance, when you meet it from environmental planners, from local authorities who say no?
Well, there's some areas that won't be appropriate to do it, for example, but Keir talked about this grey belt. You know, we talk about the green belt, but there's lots of land which is car park, disused areas. We've got it in Greater Manchester. I've got plots near me that would be ripe for it, but at the moment we're not seeing that investment from government to really drive that forward. But there's lots of places where we would welcome it with infrastructure to enable that to happen.
Yeah, because we're talking about amenities,
for example, in my local area, I've got over 10,000 people on waiting lists for housing. We want to unlock that land. We can see it. It's disused and it's grey belt, as we call it. It's not being utilised, and we want to deliver those houses on that land. And he also talked about the land banking and making sure that actually we've identified sites.
About these issues, not just with you, but with politicians, as you say, of all stripes, and those houses haven't been built. I mean,
no, because we've not had a Labour government for 13 years. Because we said we would unlock the planning situation, so we would so that we can utilise that. Michael Gove is giving back £2 billion to the Treasury on the Affordable Homes Grant, and we will unlock that. We will have local plans. The government have revised and said we don't need that. So house building is stalled under the Conservatives because they haven't really got a plan on how they're going to do it.
We talked about trust. It's trust in delivering on pledges and promises. Let's just have a look at this tweet. This was from the Labour Party. It says, the hopes of a generation are being blocked by those who more often than not enjoy the secure homes and jobs that they're denying to others. Labour will choose the builders, not the blockers. We heard that time and again. There he is in a hard hat. That's very much the image and message now. But a couple of years ago, you tweeted something, the Labour Party did, something really very different. This was at a time when Boris Johnson was trying to streamline the planning process. It says, do you want developers building on your green spaces without your say? Boris Johnson does, and it says local people should decide what's best for where they live. And there you can see the image of rather lovely, expensive homes in the countryside surrounded by lots of green space. Two very different messages.
Well, that is the point, because the grey belt is an area where you can, which is some of it is earmarked and people see it as green belt and it isn't. And the government have revoked back on their making sure we have local plans. So by having a plan that's locally negotiated and put in place, you can deliver it on your national housing target.
Side are you? Are you on the side of the people living in those rather beautiful homes who probably don't want any new towns or houses next to them? Or are you sticking to that message that we will do it come what may?
There is lots of land where we can build houses, what we want to get delivery on, that developers are land banking on, that we could actually deliver those homes. And we're saying that we will unblock that. So yes, some people might not want a house in that particular area, but actually for the wider area, you can deliver on that. And that's not on the green belt.
Towns though, you're not just talking about a car park in Manchester, you're talking about entire towns outside of other cities. That must involve some greenbelt building, surely, and you can redesignate it as grey.
But there will be some areas where you can build on that, but they're not exactly. You know, we're not talking about the Lake District, you know, just rolling up over the hills. But for example, in my local area, I've got an area where you could build a fantastic amount of houses. At the moment, we don't have the plan from government to enable that to happen.
Right, so you are on the side of those with the millionaire or the £1 million homes who don't want any development nearby. Your area might be fine. In Cambridge, they're already saying they're opposing a new town.
I'm on the side of those people that desperately need houses, and we're going to build those houses, because a house is a part of the pillars of how you can get on in life. And people so often now can't get a house. That means they're insecure in terms of being able to get on with their job, in terms of their kids going to school. It blights people's lives, and these are people's daughters, their sons, their relatives that can't get on. So we have to build the houses.
That is an ambitious vision. But let's look at what's being promised more broadly by you and Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, because we've heard from Sharon Graham, she's not the only one, the boss of the Unite Union, saying this week under Keir Starmer's leadership that the party is too timid. It's limping into number 10, she says. What's your response to that?
Well, our New Deal for working people, 1.5 million homes, the Great British Energy, I think that we're not too timid. We're realistic, but we've also got a radical programme that will change Britain for the future. Bringing in stability and security for people in work, as we haven't had that at the moment. And, you know, the trade unions have welcomed that, because it will reform the world of work for people and it will improve people's lives. We've had stagnated wages, insecure work, P&O.
But you're not promising more money, are you, for people's wages? You're not going to pay over and above what's been offered to various striking unions.
Well, actually, by making sure we've got stronger collective bargaining and that negotiation, it shouldn't be me doing it from Whitehall, but that negotiation will improve, because where you have strong trade unions and good employers, you actually do end up with better wages. But it's not just about wages. Keir talked about reform as well. There has been lots of waste because of the chaotic way in which this government has been run over the last couple of years.
But let's pick up on some of the things that Sharon Graham has suggested. Not just her, as I say, but many people at this conference that we've spoken to, on the issue of tax, on raising money to help repair the public services that you say are ailing so much. Why not tax the top 5%? That was a pledge by Keir Starmer. Why not do it?
Because Rachel set out, we've got the highest tax burden we've ever had. We've talked about the non-dom status reform of that, so we bring money in that way. We've talked about the VAT on schools,
and
private schools,
so
that we can bring money into education.
Forgive me for interrupting, but that is £5 billion. We're talking about day-to-day spending by a government of £1,000 billion.
Rachel is clear, we ain't going to tax ourselves out of this stagnant economy.
Are you happy with that?
Yes, we need to grow the economy, and we've got a plan to do it.
No tax,
we've
got
a plan.
Tax.
we're not setting out to tax the UK more than they're already significantly taxed. What we're saying we want to do is grow the economy to pay for our public services. And Rachel's been very clear on that, and we're very clear as a shadow cabinet in that. We want to give Britain the security in its future back by making sure that productivity, which is at a low level at the moment, we're able to reach our full potential.
I understand what Rachel Reeves was saying. She could not have been clearer or firmer with her ironclad discipline.
Well, I agree.
Have you always agreed? Were you disappointed?
Yes, I agree.
When she announced there will be no wealth tax, no tax on assets, no equalising of capital gains tax, no mansion tax, to make those with those assets pay a bit more to put into public services?
I agree with Rachel. If you look where the Labour Party was and you look where we are now in terms of our economic credibility, her fiscal rules are absolutely right. We've got to reassure the public of that. But if you see the disaster of what the Conservatives did, where they did unfunded tax cuts to the wealthiest, it actually crashed our economy, and that's working people that have paid the price for that.
So would you say to people gathered here today, you won't see any real improvements in the first year of a Labour government if we win next year to public services, because it's going to take time?
Because
we'd
end
wait.
the loophole in the non-dom status and bring 10,000 more into the NHS, more workers into the NHS. The VAT on private schools will enable more teachers and infrastructure into our schools. Great British Energy will invest in our renewables. The tax on the energy companies will bring down bills straight away. My new deal for working people will make sure that people have got secure work that's better paid.
Right, I mean, it does sound ambitious, but the policy...
You just told me we're not ambitious enough.
No, it does sound ambitious. I was talking about delivery.
Okay.
And of course we'll hold your feet to the fire, as no doubt will your supporters and the unions as well. It's about when pushback comes, when there is resistance, whether you will stick to these policies or you'll do what Keir Starmer did. He just cast aside his 10 pledges that he made when he stood for the leadership.
Well, no, we're already moving our plans forward. So, for example, people say, why haven't you just straight away committed to HS2 once the government have abolished it? Well, between now and the next 12 months, they're already selling the land off. So we have to see the context of how disastrous the Conservatives carry on, clinging on into power, but our values and what we're saying. So my workers' rights, we could do that within the first 100 days. It's not about extra cash. It's about making sure that we bring that legislation forward and hold them to account to ensure that the good employers treat people with dignity and respect.
Can I ask you about the plan for workers' rights? Because you did have this eye-catching idea about a right to switch off, so people didn't have to reply to emails from their bosses on evenings and weekends. Is that still your policy?
Yeah, and flexible working.
So that is still there?
It is part of our new deal for working people, because we want to change the culture of work. And do you know what? The good employers understand this. They understand that because it's better for retention. And actually, if you've got that good relationship with an employer and they do respect you have a right to switch off, it's better for their well-being. They don't have as much sickness. People aren't leaving their employment. So flexible working and all of these things that good employers already deliver is actually better for productivity in the long run.
Vicky, what do you make of what you've heard from
Yeah, I think the challenge is going to be that come the election, which say if it's in a year's time, it will be a bit further from the chaos that lots of people think they've seen with the Conservatives.
Might be more chaos.
Yeah, maybe. But Rishi Sunak is obviously hoping as he's bringing stability as well. So, there's going to be, I think, more of a challenge for Labour to maybe, be more radical, offer more things. And that does also mean potentially shadow cabinet members wanting to come up with ideas which cost money. And I think sort of, keeping a lid on that is going to be quite a challenge for Keir Starmer, because I presume, you've got to appeal to people, you've got to give them something to go out and vote for, not just we don't like the Conservatives.
I mean, our fiscal rules are non-negotiable. We're very clear on that. So if we can identify where we can move money and make that investment in a different way, that's what we're doing. But we won't make uncosted spending commitments, and we're all clear on that.
That's good to know. Have you all signed a pledge?
We have.
You're all clear, have you? We'll add it to the others. How radical and transformative would a Labour government be? From everything you've heard from Keir Starmer and now Angela Rayner.
Well, I think it would feel transformative just in the sense you've had 13 years with the Tories, so there would be lots of, there are dividing lines. I think there are differences, even if there is, caution at the same time. But yeah, I think listening to Keir Starmer's speech, now there were lots of things to look forward to, such as the new towns, but a lot of it was still attacking the Tories, and it was still, anti-Tory. And therefore, when you're asking the question, if not them, why us? It felt as though about half that speech was still not them. When, going through Partygate, talking those things, and therefore it does feel as though right now, I think, when you speak to shadow cabinet members when they probably don't have microphones in front of them, they will say that they do think it's anti-Tory sentiment that's probably going to get them into number 10. And I think that's probably still the case as things stand, but with things like planning reform, it would be transformational if you did get those houses. It was the Tories, in 2019 that pledged to do a really radical planning shake-up, won a majority of 80, and yet couldn't get it past their MPs. And it's a cross-party problem when MPs think, actually this is very near where my constituents are, they don't like it. That's not unique to Tory MPs. So I think it would be interesting to see how that actually works depending, if Labour get a majority, what size is it? Because that does have a big impact when you're trying to push through quite drastic reform.
Rishi Sunak bottled it. That's the truth. Like you say, they had the majority, but he bottled it, and because he had some backbench MPs that didn't like it. Whereas really, he could have pushed ahead, and he could have won that, and he could have kept to the promises of we're going to build the houses. And now Michael Gove can't even get the money out the door.
Look, so much of this is going to be in the delivery. The Labour Party wants growth. To be fair, the Conservative Party wants growth. Everybody wants growth. And that we'll have to see what happens with that. There's lots of external factors, by the way. The Labour Party is promising sort of political certainty in terms of the personnel. You can't guarantee against what happens in terms of international sort of issues. So growth is going to be really, really important. See how that happens. I think the puzzle still remains. How can Labour revitalise a lot of these public services, build these houses when the money just isn't there? And as Angela said, there's very, very tight rules. They've made lots of promises on spending, on tax. Where is that money going to come from? I think that is the question as we get closer to the election. All your viewers, the public, are going to be asking that question. I think that is the story that Labour needs to sort of keep telling. The other thing that Labour has to be very careful about, what you don't want is this moment of transformation. You have a change of government after 13 years, and lots of people will be very excited about that. You don't want people to be disappointed quickly with what a centre-left government can offer. So you will have to find ways of delivering and proving to the public pretty quickly.
Well, Angela, maybe not surprisingly, someone who's already disappointed by what's being offered is the former leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn. He has tweeted, as the Labour leadership rolls out the red carpet for climate vandals, arms firms and private healthcare, thousands of us are organising for the bold change this country needs. We'll keep campaigning for social justice and peace. We are the movement for the many, not the few.
I mean, I don't know what speech he was listening to, because I'd really have to try and deconstruct what he meant by that. Because I saw someone who said, we're going to get an NHS waiting list down so that people can actually get treatment again. We're going to have dentistry, we're going to have the GP appointments like the last Labour government did. We're going to have Great British Energy, publicly owned, working with the private sector to deliver lower energy bills. So I don't know where that's from,
well, you can see what he's saying. Without investment, without more money, no more private outsourcing, no increase even to get waiting lists down. How will you get those waiting lists down?
Well, we said the ending the loophole and the non-dom status, we can then put some more investment into the NHS. We talk about a sovereign wealth fund, which is our green prosperity plan, which was a 28 billion, so we can start moving with the private sector investment to give confidence to build in Britain again and to do the work we need to do.
That is tiny when you think about the scale and size of the NHS budget, the amount of money that is spent on the NHS. The Conservatives have put more money in, record amounts of money. Now, the rate of increase has slowed down, no doubt about it.
But they've completely gutted social care services, the sector I came from, made us all redundant. So actually, we talked about making sure we can get people the right care in the right place in the community that will save huge amounts. So that's that reform agenda that Wes was talking about.
One point, though. The reform agenda is really, really important. But reform costs money. You have to invest a lot of money and a lot of time to see the reforms actually deliver savings and deliver change. And I just hope that there is delivery of that quickly, and there will have to be quite a lot of money that goes into reform at the beginning.
Right.
Absolutely. But, again, my fair pay agreements we talked about, I bit the bullet and said we're going actually for social care, because that's the real problem. We've got a recruitment and retention problem where we don't have enough social care people to look after people in their own homes. I know it's my bread and butter, it's where I came from. We made them all redundant in 2010 to 15, and now we've got a problem, a crisis in the NHS because we don't have the care in the community, which which costs 5 times less than it does putting someone into
but
the NHS.
But it is still a long time. I mean, Vicky, one of the problems is we've got, winter coming along. There could be another NHS crisis. Well, there is likely to be in terms of those waiting lists getting longer. Everything that is critiqued by Angela and Keir Starmer about the state of public services in this country that is very important to people here, they're inheriting it all, and it might get worse.
Yeah, and I think they are aware of that, and that's why quite a lot of his speech was talking about the challenges and how hard it's going to be. He was trying to downplay expectations a certain amount, and it's a really difficult line, isn't it? You're trying to enthuse voters, many of them who last time voted for the Conservatives. You're trying to woo them and offer them some hope, but you're also trying to keep expectations down a bit because you can see what's coming ahead of you. And I think the idea of the NHS and reform, what exactly does he mean by that? I mean, I really don't feel I've got the answer to that yet. That's something that will still need to be fleshed out, because everyone will be looking at that thinking, well, money has been pumped in, and actually it hasn't made any difference. So what exactly do you mean by
part of the problem is we've lost so much staff. We're paying agencies because we don't have enough doctors and nurses. They're all leaving. We haven't got the technology that Wes has talked about we're going to bring into the NHS. There's a lot of things we can do.
And Angela's brought us to the end of the programme. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to all of our guests. I'll be back tomorrow at 12:15.